Hello and happy Tuesday. Welcome back to the farm. My name is Heather and I don't know which week we're on with our garden tours, but we've been filming these tours for about 4 months and I'm kind of proud of us. The garden has changed a whole lot this year. It looks like an August garden. August gardens are not the prettiest. They kind of start to break down and we are transitioning into the fall garden and we'll check on our seedlings in a little while. The kids have already started to retire their garden for the winter, and that's because the weeds really just got away from them in here, and they would get away from me too. If I was in charge of this space, that would have been really hard for me to manage. So next year, the plan is to put down weed fabric for the kids, but until then, they're going to have several chickens in here, eating up all the bugs, taking care of some of those weed seeds that have been dropped, and obviously fertilizing the ground. So this is kind of fun. I actually really enjoy having chickens next to the garden. It's really easy just to throw them extra scraps and torn out plants, and it's a really nice little marriage there. So one of the first things we'll look at are the sunflowers. Sunflowers only really bloom for around 10 days, maybe 2 weeks before they kind of look like this. And the reason that they bend down so hard is because the weight of those swelling seeds is really heavy. Can you see them all in here? So actually these little tiny flowers right here on the head of the sunflower, each one of those, if we brush them away, is attached to a sunflower seed. How cool is that? I'm actually not going to save them this year. One really cool idea that you can do if you don't necessarily want to save them for yourself is to save them for your animals. A lot of people will put a pillowcase or a piece of tulle over the head when they're at this point, let the heads kind of cure, and then they'll take them down and store them in a non-humid place. And then every once in a while they'll throw the head at their chickens in the winter, and it's a really, really nice treat. I'm just gonna leave these here for the birds, and maybe we'll get some volunteers next year from the seeds dropping. That'll be cool too. I actually did make a decently sized green bean harvest a couple of days ago. These plants do not look very good. There are several reasons why, and one of those reasons is we've had a really crazy hot summer here for an extended period of time. And the garden, it's been struggling. It does not thrive well on hose water. We actually do get city water out here, so it's been treated, and the microorganisms in the soil and the plants, they'll live, but they won't thrive. We're supposed to get some rain tonight, so I really think I'm actually going to hold off on this harvest because I think the plants will be better for it. This here is a tromboncino squash that I put in the garden. I'm trying to get it to actually climb the trellis over here. Let's see if I can convince it. Squash bug eggs, and these are squash bug nymphs. That was kind of a fail, but getting those squash bug nymphs off of the plant and that far away, they're not gonna be able to make their way back to the plant before either the elements or the chickens get to them. Overall, the pressure of the squash bugs has been pretty minimal on this variety, and I'm hoping that rings true through the rest of the season, which isn't really very long. Our estimated first frost date is toward the 3rd week of October. It's been so hot here lately that it's really hard to imagine that fall and winter are coming, but it's a fact. Look, see this poor green bean? Doesn't even have any leaves left. That's probably more than just heat. Our pole beans have come back. Oh goodness. I think that was a stink bug. Anyway, our pole beans have started producing again. I guess we can probably grab some of these. Beans that are a little bit longer and fatter and just overall bigger, I am going to leave on the plant so that I can harvest the seed later. These particular bean seeds were sent to me by a subscriber, and it's a family heirloom of hers, and I'm very, very eager and excited to grow them for as many years as I can. little yellow tomatoes are actually the same variety that volunteered in our greenhouse. They volunteered here too. And if you're not sure what a volunteer plant is, it's a plant that basically decided without your planning that it was going to grow in that spot. Last year we grew a whole lot of these in this exact spot, and apparently some tomatoes dropped, which does not surprise me, and they came back this year. Look what we got. It's actually pretty rare that I get to taste a strawberry from the garden. Our kids wake up before I'm out of bed and they do rush straight into the garden. Oftentimes they eat all the cukeamelons, all the ground cherries, and all the strawberries, but I get this one. Delicious. It's actually been super hot here again the last couple days, and so the plants have had a chance to kind of dry out a little bit, and the sugars are really concentrated. So as far as I know, it is not quite time for me to pick the sweet potatoes, but I don't have very much patience, and I want to check and see how well they're doing underground. Sweet potatoes take about 100 days from planting until you have a sizable tuber or root in the ground to harvest. So I'm gonna see if I can find the base of one of these plants. So here's a little sneak preview. I think I am gonna give them another probably 2-3 weeks, possibly even a month. That's one of the good things about sweet potatoes, is that you can leave them in the ground if need be. It can almost be like your pantry. Sometimes they could get a little bit woody, but given that the size of this one, I don't think that we are going to run that risk. I've had them be really, really big and really, really tender and sweet, and so we are gonna hope for another harvest of big ones like that. This one's pretty good though. You remember that melon monster that we had in the greenhouse? We actually caught 2 separate possums inside of our greenhouse. Well, alongside of our greenhouse, but they were breaking into the greenhouse and eating our Kajari melons in there. Well, it seems like the possums have a taste for melon in the raised bed garden as well. We have never had issues with possums getting into our garden at all until this year. I noticed this melon inside the bed right there, still attached to the plant, with the same kind of looking damage as we saw in the greenhouse a few weeks ago. So I've got the trap set, and what we've been doing is catching them and driving them about a mile away and releasing them over there. I'm not really sure how far they travel. We figured that was far enough, but if you know different, please let me know. I think basically though, these melons are pretty much done. They're looking more sad every single day. And then I do have some cukeamelons back here, which are still looking lush and lovely. The kids have just been eating a bunch of them, so there's not a whole ton, but I see one. See, with my dirty fingers. Oh, there's a bunch. Oh, it's because they can't reach this high. Speaking of high, look at how high this tomato plants have gotten. For the most part, they look pretty sad down here on the lower parts of the plant, but up there, they're nice and green, and I don't have anything else to put in this spot right now, so I'm just gonna let them be and see what happens. These are our Belgian giants. A lot of them are ripening and turning red. Some of them have gotten kind of buggy, and I've had to feed them to the pigs, but there's still quite a few doing well, and I probably should pick some of these before the rain. There's a cukeamelon all the way over here, or there was. I lost it, but that's how volunteers happen. So if a volunteer happens to come up of a cukeamelon in the middle of the walkway here, remind me about what happened. Last year I had a step ladder because I had green beans growing in this tunnel, and it looks like I'm gonna have to bring the step ladder back to get some of those cukeamelons. I have seen people pickle the cukeamelons before and have them as a fun snack at parties and things. I kind of want to collect a bunch of those and make fermented pickles with those, so I think I will. Stay tuned for that, because that'll be a fun one. Look at this funny little projection on this tomato. When my kids find tomatoes like this in the garden, they always laugh and say, "Look, Mommy, it has a nose." Got quite a few Kajari up on the trellis here. And that should help keep the possums off of the melons, a trellis. As far as I know, they wouldn't climb to get a melon, but I don't know that for sure. I've only had them get them either on the ground or apparently up in the raised bed. Okay, let's hurry up and get to the greenhouse before we lose light completely. I actually forgot that I left the doors open today. I came in around 11 o'clock in the morning and it was 111 degrees in the greenhouse. And that's why I just can't put my started brassicas in here. Brassicas are some of my fall and winter garden starts that I started last week. And because they are lovers of the cold, the heat just isn't going to do. It's going to make them go to seed super early. So I have those things started inside. Oops, I dumped my tomatoes. This is actually one of the things that I wanted to show you in here. This particular tray of tomatoes has been sitting here in the greenhouse for several weeks. So I've been really overwhelmed with the blessings of tomatoes that we've gotten this year, and I'm basically at my wit's end with wanting to deal with them. I have had many friends, families, neighbors lovingly take tomatoes off of my hands. These ones, a tray of what used to be green tomatoes, have been sitting in here for a long time, and some of them have actually started to ripen. This is actually the biggest stinking horsefly I've ever seen in my life up there, and it's quite noisy, so sorry about that. But back to the tomatoes. So I actually didn't know this, but tomatoes for the grocery store oftentimes are actually picked green, and they're allowed to ripen in the weeks that it takes to get from the greenhouse or the garden, wherever they're grown, to the store. And then they have to sit in the store for a couple weeks before they're purchased, and then the hope is that they'll stay good for a little while longer after you buy them. And I think the only way to really ensure that that process can take place is to harvest them green, which is what happens. And I have noticed that these tomatoes, although ripe, are much less vibrant. I can tell that they're a lot more dry, and I haven't tasted them yet, but I can only imagine that they have a very underwhelming flavor. I think the way that our grocery store tomatoes are grown is part of why a lot of people don't like tomatoes. They have oftentimes a really gross, I call it a mealy texture, and a very underwhelming or simply unpleasant flavor. I might go ahead and see if I can find a knife, or maybe I'll just bite into it. Let's do that. Let's just bite it. That's amazing how different that tastes. It basically tastes like nothing, which I know, these are my Heat Master tomatoes. I've grown many of them this year. I know that they have full flavor when they're allowed to at least blush on the vine and hopefully ripen in the sun. These guys were picked green and did ripen in the sun. They've been sitting here in the greenhouse this whole time, but that is a vastly different flavor. So there's got to be something to it when they're left on the vine to at least start ripening that really does affect the flavor. I'm getting a little bit more of that tomatoey tartness now that I'm getting to the middle, but the texture is just off. There you go. I need another one, don't I? That was mean. Hang on. I'm sorry. There you go, baby. I just love having pigs. It makes me feel that much better about having, wasted food. That goes a long way to growing some bacon. We're losing light, so I'm gonna have to come back in the morning to talk about our seedlings. But check out this tromboncino squash. It's basically as tall as me at this point. It has apparently tapped into some amazing nutrition down in there in the ground and has really shot up in the last probably week or so. I noticed that we're getting some baby female flowers starting. I can tell that they're female flowers because they have a small baby version of the finished fruit right at the base of the flower. Isn't that cool? So this thing here, that's going to be a male flower, and this is a female. You can really tell the difference on this particular squash. We'll look at that squash again in the morning, which is just gonna be a couple seconds for you guys. But I haven't noticed any signs of squash bugs or squash vine borers in here. Good morning, we're back in the greenhouse, and this is the status of one of our seedling trays that we started last week. We have butter crunch and Paris Island cause lettuce, some bunching onions, dill, calendula and parsley, dinosaur kale, scarlet kale, spinaches, and cabbage. Now most of these things, in order to try to get a good germination, I placed more than one seed per planting hole. And obviously we have a pretty good germination rate for most of these things. My parsley doesn't seem to have germinated yet. That particular seed was really old. I may have to restart that, but that's totally fine. So my main focus this morning is making sure that I thin out these seedlings to be one seedling per planting hole. There's obviously not a lot of space in these cell trays, and I need to make sure that each plant gets all of the available nutrients that it possibly can. And with all of these little seedlings clumping together, they're not only going to be competing for nutrients, but they're also going to be competing for light. They're going to try to stretch and grow around each other, and we're starting to see that a little bit with the cabbage that we planted. So it's going to be important that I get everything pared down to one per hole, and I have a pretty easy method for that. So I have these little tiny shears here. You could just pinch it off with your fingers, but I'm going to take my shears and clip off extra seedlings. I'm eyeballing and kind of trying to decide which seedling is the strongest in any given group, but sometimes it comes down to which ones are easier to cut out and not damage the others. You can save these and put them in salads or on top of a bagel. I'm actually going to feed them to my pigs. You know, the pigs, they love all the snacks they can get, and so these things won't be wasted. You could also compost them. One of the reasons it doesn't exactly make me sad to have wasted seed is I know that I can very easily just save some more seed this next round. A lot of these plants, especially brassicas, when they do go to seed, which they do readily go to seed, they put off so many flowers and give so many seeds that we could very nearly plan to save seeds pretty much every season and have way more than we needed. But if we wanted to, there's nothing wrong with planting only as many seeds as plants you want. It's just most plants don't have a 100% germination rate. There's a whole bunch of things that could go wrong or be wrong as part of the germination process. And so planting more seeds just gives more opportunity for things to go right. One of the reasons I like to cut the plant off at the base instead of pulling it out by the root is they're planted very, very close together, and there's a good chance that if I yanked out the root of one plant that it would affect the root of the rest of the plants, to include the one that I want to keep. And when seedlings are really small like this, everything is very, very delicate, and I don't want to end up damaging the one seedling that I'm trying to keep. It also kind of acts like a mini fertilizer almost. There are some very tiny roots left behind in the soil here, and those are just going to break down and feed the soil in these little pots. The giant horsefly from Hades is still in here. All right, so I've got this whole tray as thinned out as I'm going to get it right now. Some of the things haven't fully germinated, so there's going to be some little seedlings that I'm going to have to thin out a little bit later on. Now, I did not, and I will not probably thin out any of the bunching onions. The whole point of the bunching onions is to have a whole bunch of onions kind of clustered together in a small little group of nice tender onions. And so I don't want to be thinning that out because the close together cluster is kind of the point of it. So maybe I'm crazy, but I feel like the tromboncino grew overnight. I actually did just loop it around this string here, and it's working really well. So we've got a tromboncino here, here, and they're dotted all the way up the center aisle here. So I'm hoping that the vision is starting to come together where we'll have a really cool archway of tromboncino in no time flat. These are the most gorgeous leaves. If you've been with us this whole growing season, you know that this center aisle used to be composed of very lush and very productive tomato plants, and I just tore them out a couple of weeks ago. The most hilarious thing has popped up in the holes that used to have those tomato plants. Do you see this right now? Literal tomatoes volunteered inside of those planting holes. Now that's probably not from the plants that I had in here. It's probably from last year when I had my pigs in here. We fed the pigs tons of scraps, and I know that if we actually didn't have any weed fabric in here, we'd probably have a decent garden anyway without really trying. Got to get this before the possum does. We need to check that trap. Nope, empty trap this morning, which I guess is a good thing. I checked last night and this is our 17th week of doing garden tours, and the garden really isn't slowing down. She looks a little bit sad, but we've got our seedlings going for our fall garden and life just moves on.